Oh, yeah, so you're going to be introducing 2001 at the IC Center. How did that come about?
Well, John Vanko wrote me an email, and he said that he had initiated this, I think it's weekly or bi-weekly series, specifically about showing classic big films that are old to younger people. That was his
mission,
just to bring, once a week, bring back a classical film that perhaps a lot of young people who are really interested in film just, haven't seen. And so he suggested a slate of 5 or 6 different films. And I chose 2001: A Space Odyssey it was when I was available. It was the most convenient for me to do it today. But also, the main character is named Hal.
Oh, yes. There is a connection there.
Yeah, even my directing chair, the back of my directing chair says HAL 9000.
Oh, is that true? That's a rusty...
Open the pod doors, Hal.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Dave. I can't do that for you.
I first heard about this movie in 1968 when it came out. I was 9. And my best friend, Billy Muller, lived in the yard behind us. And his father, my family didn't go to movies like that, but his father took him to see 2001: A Space Odyssey at its premiere, probably in like Syosset or something like that, closer into the city. And for the next 2 afternoons after school, Billy and I sat on the roof of my fort in my backyard, and he told me the entire movie, piece by piece. So if you can imagine what 2 9-year-olds are saying. I remember him saying, and then this big piece of metal makes the monkeys smart. We didn't know what we were talking about. We didn't know what Odyssey was. I remember asking my father what Odyssey was, and he was like, I think it's like when you don't know what's going to happen.
That is part of an Odyssey, right? Or the best kind of an Odyssey. Yeah. It's funny because as you described that experience, I'm just a few years younger, I think, but I had the almost exact same experience, and I know I was too young. I couldn't be at the point it was originally running, but they used to run classics like this, like John Vanko is doing. When we were kids in New York, I grew up a little closer. I grew up sort of in the taint of not Long Island, not Manhattan. I grew up in Queens. But, we went in, stone's throw. But I remember seeing it in the theater with my parents, so it had to be the 70s.
Yeah, and it was one of those films that kept playing. Like, when it initially came out, it didn't make a tremendous amount of money. It wasn't even critically well-received, particularly. But I guess, it got an audience. And back then, they would keep movies in movie theaters for a longer time. Maybe they wouldn't show it as the only movie in the theater house, but it would be there 1 or 2 days a week.
Yeah, and there were, of course, the city was rife with revival houses back then, too, right. In some of our seedier neighborhoods.
I don't think I saw 2001: The Space Odyssey myself until I might have been in college. So.
Yeah, well, and it was still mind-blowing. I think when I was in college, that's when 2010 came out.
Right.
Roy Scheider.
Yeah, I introduced myself in freshman year of film school. I'm sitting there, my people would become my friends and classmates, and they just couldn't. They were like, "Your name's Hal," because they were all, of course, movie buffs. I had never really been a movie buff when I went to film school. I came to it in a different way, but 5 or 6 of the guys and girls who became my best pals in college. I mean, they grew up watching movies all day long, and so they knew 2001: The Space Odyssey like the back of their hand.
So you were shamed into seeing it, essentially.
Yeah, it's like one of those things. It happens with, it happened with Rocky Horror Picture Show, too. It's something that's so part of the culture you're moving through. Everybody talks about it. You know the songs, you know the music, all this stuff. It only occurred to me like last summer, that I had never seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Last summer?
Yeah, last summer I got on Netflix. I ordered the DVD and watched it because I was fascinated. I was talking to somebody about those kinds of movies, and I really had to stop and think. I was like, I have never seen that movie. It's so ubiquitous, the images from it.
Right.
So I actually just got it and watched it.
So you had at least a point of reference. And
yeah,
could see what
way.
Yeah.
It's funny, but it was nostalgic watching it. I've never seen it, but I'm having these nostalgic feelings.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't know if it's this. It was such an interactive. I think when I went to see it, which was actually funny enough during the same period when I was going to school, and I remember going to see it in Boston. I think not quite the same, but it was probably a midnight movie. It's still there too, but they weren't throwing like
Oh, Rocky Horror.
Yeah. Sorry.
Throwing popcorn and stuff like that.
Yeah. But it's funny because I think my passion for it started when I was living there in Boston, actually, because they had a few revivals. I did a lot of. I was probably really depressed going to school and escaped to the movies a lot. So just briefly, though, you grew up in Lyndhurst, as most people know the story, though. You grew up in Lyndhurst, Long Island.
That's right.
And you have how many siblings?
I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister. Okay,
very good. And then you mentioned earlier, you said that your way into the film school was not from like this passion for...
Yeah, it was not from the couch to the movie.
What was your...
It was art school. I went through high school getting good grades and achieving a lot in art class and in music.
Uh-huh.
Less so in music. I felt less confident about music. And really a lot of my friends did go to music school when they graduated high school. And I chose not to go to music school really because I was just afraid I didn't have the chops, the kind of mental chops for music. And so I went to art school in Boston, Massachusetts College of Art. And it was there that I discovered filmmaking. I took an elective in Super 8 filmmaking for a semester with Steve Anker, who's a experimental filmmaker who's, I think, now associated with San Francisco Art Institute or something. And it was immediately really exciting. I mean, I guess we weren't expected to make stories or anything. It wasn't that type of narrative cinema. It was really motion picture as art, visual art. So there's... not many of us told stories, but from the very beginning I tended towards crafting a narrative. And, Steve Anker was able to point that out to me, that I had a natural inclination to tell stories. And when I had to leave art school, go back to Long Island and work for a year. And by then I had been making Super 8 films and decided that I was going to try to go to a state school, a SUNY school, which had a film program, and SUNY Purchase in Westchester was the closest one. That was really my decision. There was Buffalo.
Not NYU at the time? There wasn't?
Yeah, I had to go to a state school.
Right, you did say that.
So, yeah, and when I applied to SUNY Purchase and I had my interview with the teachers and some students, most of what I could show them were my drawings. I played in some of my music and some of the little Super 8 films I had been making. But those teachers pointed out, too, that even my drawings were extremely narrative. But I was leaning towards stories in time.
Well, that was fortuitous, I guess, because the timing, in hindsight, that you went to Purchase at this particular time.
Yeah. I mean,
couldn't have been...
I just fell into the exact right place amongst the right kind of people.
My goodness.
Exactly what I needed. Because I wasn't I was a problem student in the sense that I didn't have a lot of academic, I didn't perform well academically.
Work ethic was...
My work ethic was great.
Okay.
When I got excited about
sure.
something.
Yeah.
But my academic work in high school was just enough to get through.
Yeah.
And the teachers at Purchase recognized the artistic, creative energy and imagination, I think. But they told me very frankly, they said, your SAT scores are terrible, and I don't even know if we're allowed to admit you to the college. So, I mean, we've got to, we've got to work on that. We'd love to have you here, but you have to promise to work really hard on your academics things, humanities courses, literature, reading, writing, history, whatever. So yeah, I took that very seriously, and with their guidance, it actually wasn't heinous at all. It was actually, I had a great time at college doing that aspect of college.
Coincidentally, later today, I'm actually seeing an old alumni friend of yours, David Schwartz.
Oh yeah.
There's a series that they're about to embark on at the Museum of the Moving Image called First Look, which I don't think is the first time they've done this, but so I'm going to do a segment with that and talk to David. And one of the films in that is Alexander. It's okay. The soundtrack of New York is welcome. The Alexander Rockwell is new. He has a new film.
Oh yeah,
that's part of that. And, yeah, so it looks like there's a few others I've seen, and but
David and I were. He was a year ahead of me, but we were all part of the same crowd, and he was even then at 21, 22. He was like the reigning film programmer. He wrote great essays about films. Really? He ran 2 or 3 different film programs weekly, at the school.
So super ambitious in that way.
Yeah, but really laid back and just smart, and he could talk about films like none of the rest of us could. That was all. Right. He really knew what his talent. You talked about coming from the Massachusetts School of Art. I don't think that's what it was called. Massachusetts College of Art.
College of Art, excuse me. And then and not coming and kind of coming in from a different passageway or what have you, and then ending up at SUNY Purchase, and still maybe at that point, as you arrived at the campus in the early days, maybe you had the all the experience of seeing all the entire film pantheon or whatever you want to call it. So in a way, I don't know if you're sort of described still kind of catching up to some degree sometimes, but and then I look at your style of storytelling, and in a way, I think it very much worked to your advantage as a filmmaker, because your language that you created, it was brand new, and like when I discovered your first film, because your first feature film, I should say, I discovered you with your first feature film. Just also my age wise, I just was becoming really interested in contemporary film, and there was people like you all of a sudden that were I never seen a film like that before. I hadn't, if it existed in other countries, I hadn't seen it, but this very spare, somewhat stylized approach to story in a recognizable neighborhoods that I knew, like that part of Long Island. I know that's where kind of my similar experience. So it was this very new thing, and I don't know if that's something that had occurred to you or in retrospect.
I think by the time I was making feature films, it had occurred to me, and I thought about it and had practiced it, before I made that first feature film. But one's storytelling voice and one's cinematic grammar comes, I think it's equal parts accident and focus and aim. I was maybe 2/3 of the way through my college filmmaking education before I really wrapped my hands around happily the idea of telling a story, like really a straightforward story. There's a character, there's a situation. I got very excited about it. But until then, we weren't necessarily told to tell stories in any particular way. The teachers there, who are all filmmakers or editors or writers and stuff, they were interested in letting our individual voices grow. They didn't want to manufacture certain types of storytellers. They didn't want to provide professionals for the industry necessarily, which I really appreciated. So they let us grow and find our strong points and our real interests through working and a lot of watching. I had to take film history courses and film film history courses every semester for the 4 years I was there. So I saw a lot of film. So things were different. But it's true, I didn't grow up watching films. And I always came at it probably from more literary way, because that was the other thing I really grabbed hold of by the time I went to Purchase. Was I was 20 when I went to Purchase, so reading, that was part of the deal. They said, if you're going to come here, you've got to read, and you've got to write a lot, because you've got to get stronger in those things. So I had great literature teachers, and I was reading all over the place anyway. And I think what in the early days of my films, say Trust or Simple Man or The Unbelievable Truth, some people, for lack of a better tag to put on it, would say like the stylization is kind of theatrical. But in fact, it's more literary. I think it was, and it's funny, one of the biggest events in my creative life was reading the plays of Molière, translated into English by Richard Wilbur, which are down there somewhere.
Like the Misanthrope and Tartuffe.
Misanthrope and Tartuffe. I read in one night twice. Just I discovered them. That's another big story, but
bizarre.
It was exactly the right time for me to discover these.
Mm-hmm.
I had already graduated from SUNY Purchase. Actually, it was like 88. I think it was like New Year's 1988. 87, 88.
Mm-hmm.
And they just totally captivated me. That they were really funny. They were really serious. It was in verse, so it was stylized, but it was dedicated. Those plays are dedicated to getting at reality, and what occurred to me and why I kept reading them again and again compulsively through this one long New Year's night is because I don't think I could say it in these words at the time, but I recognized that I could do this in my idiom. I could do this kind of. I'm not going to write verse, but I can make movies about the reality I live in.
Uh-huh. Oh, so
that's poeticized and elevated, and it could be funny and it could be dead serious as well. And that's really what I set out to do. I mean, The Unbelievable Truth. That's why Moliere's books are in the. She's reading The Misanthrope in the first half of the film.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think, in a lot of ways, I've never really stopped doing that. I've investigated other types of stories and other investigated genre, but really, I don't think I've ever really changed. I want to talk about the situation as it is now, as I experience it, and as my associates and family and friends and experience reality. But I'm not interested in naturalistic realism.
It's sort of like something just crystallized that you figured out, like with that confidence of saying, I know how I could do this. It reminds me almost of when I was reading, I don't know if you read the Bob Dylan Chronicle, Part 1.
Yeah, I did.
There's a moment in it where I just remember it, and I don't care.
Biography and history is outside.
Oh, okay. In the library here. I remember there's one, I can't pull a lot of little things from that book, but I can remember one thing where he describes being able to, he figured out about being able to, about musically, about how to take these, song structures, and he can do it like many different ways, sing a song many different ways in a way that will work, and it's like he just knows how to do it. And of course it drove many of his quasi fans up the wall. I think those truly committed would probably go along with whatever he decides to do because they believe in him and they follow him there, creatively. So it just kind of reminded me of that same way, the way he described it, like he discovered this thing and he knew he could.
Yeah, it's an experience I
wish
everyone in the world could have at some point. Yeah. It's very exciting.
And then you did it.
You just intuit that the skills you have at that moment and the interests you have at that moment collide with a certain technical knowledge, or knowledge generally about what a song really is, what a story really is. And you just, it's just an incredibly exciting feeling. You just feel like an instrument yourself that's humming, and you can just like, I could do this.
But how do you then convey that? It's the other part of it is that
that you don't have to convey to anybody.
Okay.
People just want you to tell the story.
Okay. But I'm actually thinking of the actors. Like this. Not only did I rewatch a number of the films, but I haven't seen it in quite a while, but I also just sat there yesterday going through each cast. And I also watched a bunch of shorts yesterday. But I went through each cast, and I put down, like, as many of the names as I could kind of see kept repeating. And as I went to go down, each year I would say, oh, well, that guy was actually in that first film, and I'm going to put, so I'm just looking at the same dozen. There are like a dozen people. Yeah. But from the beginning, it seemed like, Adrian and Martin and Robert and Bill and these folks. Edie Falco is another, right? She was there quite a bit. And then eventually Parker Posey. And, I mean, it's this troupe that sort of got your language. And, I mean, what were those conversations, or how did you workshop that?
They really were conversations, because, I mean, I thought I knew what I was doing. I'm writing the script. But, like, for instance, I knew Bob Burke. He was at Purchase with me same year. And we had done some work together as director and actor at Purchase. But he had been out of the thing. He wasn't pursuing it. This is, we're like 4 years out of Purchase. So I gave him the script. And he just, he laughed out loud. He just said, this language is hilarious. Mm-hmm. It's great. Adrian hadn't done too much other reading of scripts and plays or anything like that. But she responded to the language too. And, when pressed about how to interpret this type of dialogue writing, they said, as well as Martin years later, says, you just trust the language. If you can't hear... and this was all... Martin was saying that if you can't hear the music of it, and you can't get the tempo of it, then you should talk to Hal. But otherwise, it's pretty there. It's pretty... You got to listen to the melody as well as understand the words. Mm-hmm. The words aren't that hard to understand. But it's only in the talking it out. When we did the first read-through of The Unbelievable Truth around a big table in my old boss's back office, I remember that night. It was just a laugh riot. I had never laughed so hard in my life. Everybody was just hilarious. We couldn't, it took us hours to get through reading the script.
Why are you so sure the human race is going to kill itself?
Because it can.
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will.
The human race has never invented anything it didn't use.
True. But that's not the last word, is it?
What's the last word?
I don't know. Faith, maybe?
Which one, faith or maybe?
I'd like to see you again.
It's too late. You had your chance.
Let me explain.
I have a deal to keep.
Fuck the deal.
I have nothing to feel sorry about, Mr. Hotshot, auto mechanic, philosopher. And I know exactly what I'm doing, so just drop dead. You can't have faith in people. Only the deals you make with them. People are only as good as the deals they make and keep.
I know what you need.
Excuse me?
You need a woman.
Oh?
That girl is crazy.
I know, but I like her.
Yeah, but she's leaving town.
So I've heard.
So come on, what do you say? I know what you need.
Excuse me?
You need a woman.
Oh?
That girl's crazy.
I know, but I like her.
But she's leaving town.
So I've heard.
So come on, what do you say? I know what you need.
Excuse me?
You need a woman.
Oh?
And so that was very satisfying. And that was kind of like the...
Do you remember who was there at that
Well, Robert Burke wasn't there because I forgot to tell him.
And even though
I thought I told him, I was just like checking off of the list, but Adrian
there weren't emails,
was there.
So
there were no emails. Adrian and Edie were there. Matt Malloy.
Sure.
I think Bill Sage was there to read a couple of other...
He was in very, very briefly, right? That first
time. He was always getting really close to being the lead man. He came very close to getting the lead role in The Unbelievable Truth. And then...
Does he know that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then very close to getting Martin's role in Trust.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew I wanted to work with him. I found his theater work at Purchase was really kind of interesting. And by then, actually, him and Robert Burke had become friends. And so Simple Men was next up. You have to remember, we made all these films like really quickly. I mean, between 1990...
Yeah, you were working on a clip, weren't you?
1993, I think we made like 3 feature films, 2 television-length 1-hour films, a bunch of short films. And so it just made sense to just reach... that was really good. Let's make another film where you play a slightly different kind of character. So you just reach out to these collaborators who are always around.
Well, bits like the shoving matches that would go on throughout, that was a recurring bit. Something like that. Was that written in, or?
I don't think I would write that in, but I knew it when I was writing it. I knew I didn't. It was both practical and a different kind of ambition. Mm-hmm. I like the absurdity of it,
Yeah.
Kind of pointless machismo, just, putting on a little show. Right. Nobody really wants to fight. Nobody really wants to throw a punch. But we needed some violent interaction that was funny.
Yeah.
And also, underline the stupidity of these men generally.
Right. And then I guess later on, which film was it where you brought in Kevin Corrigan kind of as the, that wild, the Brando, James Dean kind of town, leather clad.
Right, yeah, I think Kevin I first worked with in Henry Fool, so it was 1996.
Yeah, that was Henry Fool, right? Yeah.
He played Warren.
I was skipping ahead a little bit, but I remember some of the you have a way of kind of mocking these masculine stereotypes. At the same time, you have cast all these very really strikingly good-looking, talented masculine actors.
Well, both myself and those actors, Martin Donovan, Robert Burke, Bill Sage, I mean, we all share an appreciation for a certain type of classic American movie star from the 30s, 40s, 50s, whether it be Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart,
Gary Cooper.
And I always forget to remind people of this, but I mean, from the very beginning of my film study, when I started making films, Harold Lloyd and Buster Keaton were incredibly important to me. Not being that physical myself, I really admired their physicality and what could be told without words. So a lot of what I try to do, it's becoming more conscious and perfected as I get older and make more films. But, like working with Parker Posey is a really good example. Parker's a tremendous verbal actress. She's got great facility with language. But she's also a great physical actress, a comedian, really. And that's really what I tried to get at. And I had to do it in a very simple way at the beginning of my career because, I actually didn't have that much experience and practice, but the right integration between the dialogue and the physical activity, that's what I really want to get at. And like in Fay Grim, for instance, Parker's just constantly doing these lovely minuets of language and physical activity.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to become, so it's physical. Physicalizing the dialogue, I think that's what I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
There are joys to just making a good, solid picture of a person sitting there saying excellent language. But I find like even something that simple, I start to choreograph it a little. Martin spoke about this excellently once in some interview somewhere. But he said, working with Hal, I found out that saying the line here and then saying the other line here really makes a difference. It's just rhythm.
Right.
Rhythm and melody. Rhythm and melody.
At a certain point, though, let's say you made Unbelievable Truth in 89, or it came out in 89, Trust, Simple Men. You could have, at that point, I'm sure, by the early 90s, started casting, I don't know, anybody, but you could have started bringing in.
Right.
Certainly.
Casting up.
Casting up, is that the
Right.
expression? But chose to continue to work, or I assume I don't know about Parker Posey. I know she had already had kind of been in that, early group of indie, the indie new wave. Whatever.
She had done Party Girl by the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I, certainly still choosing to work with independent filmmakers as opposed to. This was what her decision. But you keep working with Martin and Donovan and Parker and Adrian Shelley, and so.
What was
why?
Yeah.
Why was? I mean, it's terrific to see. As you go into maybe your 15th or whatever feature, for I don't know, I have 13th feature. Excuse me, you're going into your 13th with Ned Rifle, but to see still you're working with essentially the same folks.
Yeah. Well, one part of that phenomenon was simply what we were mentioning before. We were making films nonstop. For 10 years, I made films nonstop. There was never a time between the fall of 1988 and the fall of 1998 when I was out in pre-production, production, or post-production or something.
Did you ever overlap there, too? Were you about to say you overlapped at times?
And overlapped, plenty of times overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
So, on the one hand, we had a really good thing going. None of us were becoming millionaires, but, everybody was making money. I was able to buy a home, so we had a good thing going that way. But also, we had an audience around the world who would just, a Hal Hartley film without Martin Donovan at a certain point became like a scandal.
Sure.
Something.
I guess Scorsese had that same problem for a while,
probably,
right? There was a while there.
We at our age, in the early 90s, starting out that way, we thought a lot about Scorsese and De Niro and that whole crowd.
You really?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it was easy to look at, or Cassavetes,
of course,
his gang. So
Altman, I guess, had his. Certainly, he kept going back to a lot of the same actors for many years.
So, that was that.
I noticed. You may have to correct me here because I did rewatch a bunch in the last week or two. Was it not also in The Unbelievable Truth, one of the characters is reading some sort of screed or some sort of book that's kind of... But it was like somebody was reading a book, and the author was Ned Rifle.
Yeah, I had been using the Ned Rifle name in different ways. It's also in Trust. In Trust, one of the books is attributed to Ned Rifle. And it might, in The Unbelievable Truth, the first film, it might have been Adrian reading.
Yeah, I think it was.
In fact, passages from Jonathan Nischel's, I believe it's The Fate of the World. It's, a groundbreaking book from the 70s about destroying the ozone, everything we're going through now. But I had doctored some of the language, pasted it into another book, and put the author as Ned Rifle.
Okay, so what's...
Ned Rifle was a pseudonym I made up in college. It was funny. It wasn't a pseudonym then. It was just a character name. We wrote all the time. We had so many script and story writing classes every semester for 4 years. And it was a little bit like a conservatory at SUNY Purchase. There were like 20 of us accepted as freshmen, and then by the time we graduated, there were about 12 of us. So it was really tight, and we were always having to read out loud assignments, script writing assignments. And they were always assignments, no one, designed to teach us a certain aspect of storytelling or characterization. So, we used to try to meet the demands of the assignment, but also crack up our friends in class, And so I had written one assignment, this character, which this name I thought was hilarious, Ned Rifle.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a Western, but it's also kind of childish. And I started to use Ned Rifle as the character in so many different assignments, So,
yeah. But you also used that name, right? Didn't you for scoring?
And then when my career started, I made The Unbelievable Truth. My friend Jim Coleman provided me with a bunch of music. He was in a band called Cop Shoot Cop back then, but he made his own kind of experimental, kind of atmospheric kind of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I used some of that, but then he went away with his band, and I needed much more music, which I made myself with my guitar, just sitting in front of the editing machine. And it was still kind of atmospheric. I didn't really think of myself as a guitarist. I didn't really think of myself as a musician at that time. And so I felt a little shy about saying, and additional music by Hal Hartley. So I just said, additional music by Ned Rifle. And it sort of stuck, because later on I was always learning something weekly back then. It's like, well, you've got to publish the music so that, you can get royalties and stuff like that. Yeah. So we just made Ned Rifle music, and the music I made for
that was your publishing company?
Yeah,
was it? Okay.
Ned Rifle music.
Yeah, okay.
Still is, right? Okay. Yeah.
Then it became the son of Fay Grim and Henry Fool, right?
Finally, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Once I knew I was going to settle down and write Fay Grim, I knew there would have to be a third and final picture about the son, whose name, Ned.
Mm-hmm.
When I wrote Henry Fool and we called the kid Ned, I wasn't thinking about Ned Rifle at all. It was just,
no.
It was just, I have an uncle Ned.
Okay.
It's short for Edward.
Right.
Ned. Right. And then trying to think about what the third movie should be called, like Ned Fool, Ned Grim. And then it took a while, and I was like, oh, Ned Rifle. It could be. It turns out to be his maternal grandmother's maiden name.
Okay.
Rifle.
Sure. Oh, right. There has to be some sort of reason why I wouldn't have either of his parents' last name, I guess.
Yeah, well, he's supposed to be.
Is it going to be Liam Aiken? Is he going to be the actor? Is he coming back?
Liam Aiken is back. So he was 7 years old when we made Henry Fool.
Right.
So that was one of the most exciting and really pressurizing things about the Kickstarter campaign, and then the whole.
To be able to afford him now, because of his.
Well, he's great. He's
a
team player, but we all knew. We've been trying to finance this film for a couple of years, and it really has to be made now. I mean, I have lots of other scripts. Actually, some scripts that could be made for a lot less too. And the temptation was, well, why don't we just make one of these other films? But this is the one that really has to be made now. Everyone's exactly at the right age that they need to be.
Oh, I see. Right, narratively and
Yeah.
otherwise, and everybody's available, I guess. At one.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is and the third, I guess, person being Thomas J. Ryan, who will be reprising his role as Henry Fool again. And you mentioned the Kickstarter campaign for Ned Rifle, and I know that your last film, Meanwhile, feature, right? That was your last feature?
Yeah.
And that was funded also by your Kickstarter, or
that
partly?
That was
Which one?
the distribution was.
Oh, I see.
It was
Okay,
a much
very good.
smaller amount. The film was
So you
made.
self-distributed that one? Theatrically? Or?
No, theatrically, I did. Yeah, it was limited. I traveled around and showed it, but we distributed the DVD, home video, worldwide from Possible Films. But what I wanted to do was to get it onto iTunes and Amazon and all that. To go into business with what was then called New Video,
Right.
which is now called Cinedigm. And they were all for it. It was going to be a good deal. So, but I needed to create all the stuff, that what we call the deliverables, to make that deal happen, which is everything from insurance to protect the distributor, copyright related issues. You've got to do all this legal stuff before you can actually go into business and get a film distributed. And so that we needed money for that, and that's what we did at Kickstarter thing for.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Because I haven't seen it. But is it?
I'll give you a DVD.
Oh, thanks.
Many here.
Oh, great. That'd be great. So this current Kickstarter, or I should say, the recent Kickstarter that you successfully and recently had, like about 2 or 3 months back, right?
No, it ended on December 3rd.
Just okay.
November 3rd.
The other day.
The other day.
A few weeks ago. That one was for post-production, or is it for?
No, this is for the entire.
So, really? Okay. So pardon me. So this most recent Kickstarter campaign, then you haven't started shooting it?
No, we'll start shooting the film in March, late March or early April.
Where's that?
2014.
Where will that take place?
Around here, probably a lot in Queens, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Queens, a little bit in Brooklyn.
Like
it's a story that takes place all over the country, but we, at $300,000, we have to do it kind of around here.
Right. Well, Fay Grim, right, was done. No, I'm sorry. Fay Grim, right?
Fay Grim was
shot in Europe,
actually,
right?
Yeah.
Right, mostly, right? But you were based in Germany.
We were based in Berlin.
And
we shot all the interior Queens parts in Berlin.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And some of the Istanbul stuff. But we also went to Istanbul and we went to Paris. That is quite a project. Shot on 3 continents and 4 countries in 24 days.
Mm-hmm. I guess Fay Grim came out only 7 years ago, maybe, or a little bit, maybe more than that.
2007, I think it was.
Okay, so it's like things have changed pretty drastically, haven't they? In this industry.
Technologically, it's.
Well, you're shooting for this budget. You're keeping local. I mean, I think that all is good stuff, but
but it all stems from the business changes stem from technological changes, and a lot more people watch films on their phones and computers now, and stream them and all that, and so the kind of business you did with the feature film in 1990 that doesn't really exist anymore on that scale, in the small scales. It's different if it's a star identified $10 million film. Those are still out there, and people go to the movies to see them. But it tends to be the more mainstream types of stories, and like I say, star identified. But if you're making less conventionally structured stories without stars, you've got to reinvent how you make a living at that. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very excited. That's why I made Meanwhile and why I wanted to distribute it that way, because it really works.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the company gets checks every quarter from Send a Dime. People watching the film on their phones and on their computers all over the world. It's really kind of clean and neat.
So
you don't have to spend as much to make movies, and you also don't have to spend as much to get movies distributed and out to the people who want to see them, which is interesting.
So you're fortunate enough to have a name in the.
Yes,
that's kind of grandfathered into
I've done that 20 years of work to make.
Yeah, no, but you're it's interesting because you're at one time you could be in a very difficult situation, someone of your place in the current landscape of filmmakers. Yeah. You have, as you'd said, the Hollywood size, as The Wolf of Wall Street opens this week, and some of the other now Martin Scorsese, I guess, makes tentpole films, but and then you have on the other end of the spectrum, you have films like our mutual friend Nathan Silver, who I saw last night, who made Exit Elena and Soft in the Head, and operates in that landscape, and they both confined in a way. I don't know if they're. I don't know how satisfied always Nathan is. I know he's more ambitious,
right?
But you're in this place where you have to try to figure out how to make this size film work, and and it seems as though you're calibrating the whole system for yourself as you
was
describe
at the
it.
beginning too.
Yeah. Right, that's true.
It's what was it? After The Unbelievable Truth, which was a different kind of situation where, I was really in control of all the money that was raised to make it, but it was a tiny bit. But when we stepped up a bit with Trust, that was the first conversation. The companies that were interested in forwarding, advancing money, asked for changes in the script.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, but, they were talking about like $1 million. And so I said, well, what if you just give me $700,000 and I don't make any changes to the script? And they're like, okay. So I've always been that way. I'll compromise. But
it's a practical
I compromise with the money more than I'd compromise with the script. I mean, I'm open-minded, actually. I've got this reputation in some quarters of being this, like...
You don't have the mortgage on Lake Como to worry about, so you have that little bit of that flexibility, maybe, or...
You kind of know what's important to you.
Okay.
That's the best. That's the only thing you really need to compromise well. You have to know what's important to you and what you won't change. And, if suggestions about cutting a script or moving things around, editing the script... aren't good, then you compromise elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many ways to make things. Everyone my whole career, it seems I've bumped into people who were complaining 20 years ago and still complain now. They're like, I just can't raise this $40 million to make a film. It's horrible. I'm like, have you ever thought about making the film for $10 million? Say? And a lot of people just can't think that way. They're like, no, I need $40 million.
I wish you could name names.
They tend to not be people who make too many films.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
But that's what I learned from watching early Scorsese films, for instance, how smart he was at getting incredible scenes and incredible effects with limited means. He knew what was important to him.
Yeah.
You can say that about everybody. David Lynch, I see that all the time. It's nice to make a living making a film. I was not expecting that when I started making feature films, and then within like 2 years, I was definitely making a living and had a career. And since then, I've taken lots of chances, and sometimes I've self-financed the whole project and whatever, and took that risk. But yeah, it's really important for me, for my films, to not only earn me a living, but because it's important because it means something. It means that the film is being seen by people. What I really don't want to do is make films that nobody sees. It doesn't have to be the same amount of people who are going to see The Wolf of Wall Street, necessarily. But it is really terrific. It's a great feeling when you know that, hundreds of thousands of people in the past month have watched your film. That's a great feeling.
Yeah. I get that every time I post one of my shows. Except the numbers. No, I don't quite have those numbers yet. We're working towards that. It's an interesting thing, building something from the ground up and trying to. Yeah, I'm listening quite intently as you describe it, and you're inspiring me too in the process. I wasn't planning on skipping back too much, but another thing that happened not long ago at the IFC Center, they had this documentary film festival called Doc NYC, John Vanko. It's his festival, basically, essentially. And so one of the films that was there, which I programmed all the, I produced all the panel discussions that happened over a course of 4 days as part of the staff there. But and then I did some Q&As, like with some of the filmmakers also, during the film. One of them was this film called Whitney Rancick's film. He has a new documentary.
About the shooting gallery.
Yeah, about the shooting gallery. Shooting, and now I'm going to, of course, I got to remember it. Misfire.
Been close to those guys making that film for so many years. It's been called so many different things.
Is that true?
So I actually myself can't remember what the final.
But have you had a chance to catch it yet?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They needed to show me a couple of different cuts over the past year because they wanted to include pictures of me and stuff like that, and they just wanted me to sign off on it just for legal reasons.
Sure. So were they the same in the same class, Whitney or
no? They were under Whitney and Bob Goss.
Bob Goss, yeah,
were like 2 years or 3 years behind me.
you.
I know they were working on my senior thesis film with me, and we all became friends. And,
right.
Stuff. So yeah, they were a little behind.
Yeah, because you didn't. I don't remember your. I don't know. I mean, I don't remember your participating too much in that.
In the shooting gallery, no, I didn't.
Yeah. Okay.
But I did go into business with them to make Henry Fool.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a good experience, and for the reasons that they eventually went out of business.
And the film definitely touches on at length. Rather explores that, what was going on there,
right,
how much was going on,
right. So I didn't want to be interviewed because I don't have anything good to say.
Right.
And I don't even know if I have anything insightful to say.
Understood. Yeah, I was just kind of curious about that. He's there you go. Oh, I just made a note to myself too in terms of technique and stuff. You mentioned, you just mentioned, I think, Fay Grim, right? Because you made Fay Grim with them.
No, I didn't make.
Which one was it? Henry Fool. You said. I'm sorry, Henry Fool. I am listening, but I got distracted. You made Henry Fool with them, but was it? Were you using the style of Dutching? Dutch using is that what they call the
Not
camera?
Not back then. I started doing that Dutch angles.
Dutch angles, yeah.
I started doing that in the late 90s after Henry Fool. Particularly, it grew out of all the work I was doing in video, in standard definition video, with these very small cameras and essentially a square, 133 frame.
Yeah.
There was something about the smallness of the cameras and the intimacy and I shoot things differently. I shoot people and I shoot places different depending on the nature of the machine I'm using to make the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
A 35 millimeter camera that's the size of this lamp beside you, which weighs 15 pounds.
Yeah.
You look at things differently. But Sony camera is the size of this water bottle, which weighs 1 pound. I let those realities affect how I look at things. And so it didn't take long before notions of levelness, seemed beside the point.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, even in our real lives, it's a psychological imposition we put over. We're not always looking at things level. We look this
way.
Right. Yeah. But that's not what I wasn't trying to illustrate a kind of naturalistic way of seeing or anything. It was. I like the artifice of it. I like
right. It was another
things differently.
Yeah.
To jar it. Also, it's fun. Because it's very much like comic books.
Yeah.
And I think I really started doing it first in the Book of Life with Martin Donovan and P.J. Harvey. So we're telling this funny, but thoughtful, kind of complex story about the second coming. Jesus coming to New York at the end of the century to end the world, and deciding not to go through with it. There's something, a Dutch angle like that. It puts, I think, in a certain way, it signals to the audience that okay, this is lighter than it may seem. It's okay to giggle.
That's funny. Why do you? Yeah, that's true. Why do you suppose?
I don't know. I associate it somehow with comic books. Comic book frames are never.
Yes, I was thinking Batman, the original Adam West series in the '60s. Right. They would shoot in the villain's lair was always on a Dutch angle.
Right. Yeah.
You'd be in the Joker's lair or the Penguin, and they would always be shooting on a Dutch angle like that.
And it was that series, I'm absolutely certain, they just let themselves be inspired by the original comic books.
Sure.
Which kind of
the BAM and the
over-determined kind of framing of things. Close up of somebody saying, "Damn," and it's like tilted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that seemed appropriate with Fay Grim, too, which is an espionage film.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you see it a lot. I was getting my hair cut about a month ago, and there's these Russian guys who got TVs in front of every single chair.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how I find out what's playing on TV. So
That
I think
once
I was
every
watching Game
4 or
of
5
Thrones
months.
or something like that. Or
Oh, okay.
Whatever. And I was like, yeah, Dutch, level, Dutch, level, Dutch.
It's funny because I was reading about it and a little bit, and it might have been, I don't know, on your Wikipedia page for all I know, but it was, and they said the 2 shots that weren't Dutching was just because the guy on the camera forgot.
On Fay Grim?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'm assuming that was one of the.
That was Sarah Colley who shot that. But we did a lot of work. I mean, that was as soon as we set something up, we would just say left or right, meaning which side goes down.
Yeah.
Because we also didn't want to cut like left to left. I was shooting you tilted left, and shooting me tilted right. That's what we wanted.
Sure.
But sometimes, because we also it wasn't a part of the whole working dynamic. Also, is that sometimes you're way above a subject, sometimes you're way below it. I remember is one scene in the kitchen in Fay's house. And the camera, were on short sticks halfway down a flight of stairs that led to the basement, looking up into the kitchen where these guys were doing all this movement and stuff. And it was all choreographed, and she had to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking at the monitor, saying like, wow, we're level, right? We're level, but it looks incredibly angled, so that was a choice to say, look, this is a good shot, so it's level, sue us. But sometimes, I don't know, sometimes, we shot, like I said, 4 different countries, 3 different continents in 24 days. I mean, sometimes you just forget things.
Yeah, sure, of course, sure. As we wind down, was it Kelly Reichardt had a bit role in your first film?
She did, yeah.
Was she part of Purchase, that group? Or?
No, she wasn't. I met her. I haven't seen her in years, but I follow her films very closely.
I was going to say, poor thing, whatever happened to her?
No, she's doing great. She's a really good film. One of my favorite.
Love to have her on here too.
Right now. No, I forget how I met her through some other people, some musicians, because she was tight with this kind of community of rock musicians out of Boston somehow, and I don't know. I needed music or something, and I met her, and then she wanted to be involved with The Unbelievable Truth, and so none of us were professionals then. We just did whatever, and he said, she'll do this, I'll do that. But she was around. She made The Unbelievable Truth with us.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That was just an unusual. I know. I don't remember. Wouldn't know her face, especially maybe 30 years ago,
right.
To look for But and then I looked back at the credits and I was like, oh my god, that's an odd thing. Yeah. All of a sudden, and it's so far back in your career that Kelly Reichardt appears, and she's definitely on my list of people to talk to too, because I'm also she's done some really great work in the last
Yeah. I mean, all her films are really interesting.
I'm actually, I queued up her first. I think it was her first film, the one she did even before Old Joy. Old Joy, yeah.
River of Grass.
Yeah, I'd never seen that one.
Right.
Thank you, and I mean, very much for so much of your time, and I think we've hit a lot of the points.
Well, you edit this down to what, like?
Not much, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. There's no, it's a podcast. So the beauty of it is that, you just put it up on iTunes or on, I partner with Rooftop Films. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I am, yeah.
They do like all those outdoor screenings, mostly during the summer, but, and so my, the podcast is on their website, on their home, but it's also then it streams over to, or feeds to the iTunes. And there's no, you're not blocked in by any time constraints. So it's all really a matter of finding that sweet amount of time where somebody's going to, want to listen to the entire conversation. Right. So it usually, I do a lot of my shows have been several segments, and I'll put them together and I'll do, bridge them together with music and little intros and stuff like that. But what I'm trying to get towards is more like this, longer format, conversations, and that's I in particular really appreciate you giving me so much time, because it'll be like specifically just yourself on that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is a good time. The day after Christmas. Is it the day after Christmas or 2 days after Christmas? It's 2 days after Christmas.
I'm Jewish.
Anyway, nothing's
so I'm
going
Jewish, and I knew that, but I have
Right.
a little kid. I have a little kid who was like going crazy 2 days ago with the gifts and
But it
the
doesn't
Lego
matter.
everywhere.
Everybody. I mean, no one's coming to work
Right.
this week.
Oh yeah,
So,
it's a day.
So yesterday I was able to actually just turn off the email and everything and just
Really?
write all day without having to feel guilty.
All right. Well, thanks very kindly, and I hope maybe as Ned Rifle, maybe around that time or some point, we
definitely.
can sit
Get in
back
touch
again.
with
And, it's I think the people that are listening are I haven't said it to many people, but those who I have were very excited to hear that I was going to have on Hal, and I'll stay in touch. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for your interest.